With everything now set up, I can now go to each group and I will do light compression. Now, compression is a great subject to start on. I know there's going to be producers that don't really compress much at all. There's some producers that will compress every single channel, in a light mode. But I'm not going to tell you guys that I think you shouldn't compress or that I think you should compress every channel. There is going to be a very subjective answer depending on what you're working on. Now, for me, with compression in general, I'm very light with it. The only reason I am using compression majority of the time is to glue elements together and keep the dynamic range tighter. Rather than having stems loose and kind of jumping out of the mix here and there, the compression is going to help me in the mixing process to really balance things. So first things first, let's start with our drum group, which is going to be right here. Let's solo this, and let's fire up our FabFilter C2. If you guys have the regular compressor, similar settings, it's going to work the exact same way. Now, what I like doing is dialing in the drum group, and generally the rest I'm going to do here in a moment, a very light and clean compression. So I'm not overdoing it with coming in. You'll see the reduction here. I'm not going to be overdoing that. Now, what I like doing on my drum group is pushing it a touch harder. So if you guys actually open up our display, this is going to show us how much we're actually reducing and kind of squashing, so to speak. If you go down to actually a vocal setting, what it does is shut our ratio off. So we don't even need to use that. This is going to give a much more powerful crunch and punch to the drum group, which is what I've done in previous videos with Logic's onboard compressor. Same idea. So today what I'm going to be looking for is a tiny bit on the threshold. So we're going to see how this comes in over here on the reading. So let's go to the display and open this up here. And let's go fast with the attack. Generally right here is good. And when I do fast attack, I'm usually medium in the middle for my release. As you guys can see with the interface, if you're newer to FabFilter C2, very straightforward. You have your in and out, and you have your reduction here. This is how much is going to be squashed, and you guys can see your numbers here. And when I say squash, that's what the compressor is really pushing down. That's the amount of dB. And for you guys to hear that, as we solo this right here, if you guys are familiar with FabFilter Q2, has the same idea, we can hear what is being actually pushed down. That's the compression amount that's going on. So if we bring that off, now this is the full drum. And I'm going to bring down the wet gain a touch. And the range, we can go lower on that. So when I click that, it resets it real quick. I just want to make sure. I'm looking between 3 and 4. Let's bring up the mix amount. This is going to really push. And guys, this is great too. If you are new to FabFilter, when you scan over, it's going to give you a little help tip at the top that tells you exactly what you're doing. So if you are new to compressors, that's going to help guide you. But what I'm doing is actually pushing my compressed process, which again, we can headphone in, we can solo that. The actual compressed process versus the actual original input signal. Therefore, it's making it much more louder and fuller. Okay, so I'm liking where the drums are sitting there. Let's now move on and do a similar process to our perks. So let's now solo out our drum kind of fill here, the break fill. So let's do a similar process here. We're going to kind of rinse and repeat and go over and over. Each settings are going to be pretty much slightly different. The drums I like to push harder. That's definitely a taste thing. So definitely up to you guys. Now I'll open up the display again for my break drums or my buildups. I like going more of a punchy. So if you guys actually do either punch or pumping, this is going to set that kind of style that we want. Again, I'm going to bring down the range a bit towards 40, and let's dial in the threshold on those. And let me check out how much we're doing here. Let's go really hard on a ratio, almost limiting it. You know, not a lot. It's mainly getting my brake kick bounce. Now, guys, keep in mind when we are dialing in the fader levels in a moment, in the next section here, after we get through some processing, this compressor is going to be reading things differently. So as we're going and as we're mixing, we also need to keep in mind the compressor might be reading things differently. For example, if I were to now bring back my brake kick a little bit, this is going to be reading less. See the amount right there? Now it's not reading that amount. So we have to keep in mind when we mix a little later, the compressor is going to be changing its reading, how much it's actually pumping or, you know, actually compressing. So we got to keep that in mind. And again, I'm looking at between 3 and 4 in the compression there. So that's feeling good there. Let's now move on to the guitars. Now the guitars in a drop, which is going to be this section here, you can see obviously this fill we're going to have to bring down because that's going to fight the compressor a tremendous amount. We need to bring these, we need to kind of squash these is a good word for them. Not overdone, but they need to sit back in the mix because I have my chords as my main focus. So for a guitar group here, I like going for a classic style, something more relaxed, but I do like going a bit harder on the threshold. So you guys see when that came in, I'm going to have to obviously dial that down there, because that's really activating the compressor. That's why when you're grouping stuff, if something's sticking out way louder than the rest, it's not going to work well because the compressor will react to that so much that if that is very, very loud, that's when you'll get out of control with your dynamics. You know, a certain snare that's really loud is getting really squashed and whacked in the back of the mix. We need to keep in mind when we're grouping stuff like this, if there's something extremely loud like that, your compressor is just going to go haywire once it gets to that. So we need to really make sure that's put together well in the mix there. So subtle amount, but the threshold is definitely harder. Definitely don't want this. So we're going a touch harder there than the other ones. That's okay because that's a mix thing in my head. I know I want my guitars on that drop not to be the main focus. They need to be there rhythmic-wise to just help with the production. So those don't need to be extremely loud. Therefore, I can compress and push them down relatively harder than anything else. Now, the drop chords and the bass, I do not want to overcompress. This is going to be lighter because these are already kind of processed where they need to sit. If I really squash the dynamics on these, meaning a lot of threshold, they'll get lost. They'll get kind of thinned out. They'll feel dull. We don't want that. So let's go careful with this one here. Okay, let's dial this in now. And we can keep the clean setting for this one. I'm not going to touch any of this. Again, I'm going to go, why I would want to do a longer release is because I'm just kind of keeping everything tamed, which we'll see here in the display. I'm not really trying to get a pumping feeling or pushing them in the back, meaning over threshold. I'm getting something just to level them out the tiniest of bit. I don't really want to do much more than that. And that's when you get your pumping feeling and that quote-unquote squashed effect everyone talks about. Really not going to go much further than that. The chords and the bass there are pretty straightforward. I'm not going to touch them much. And I might even take, sometimes this is not an always rule of thumb of put these together. There's going to be times where I actually will compress the mid bass and the sub bass completely separate. And that's a decision I might make later on as we're doing this. Does that need to happen? Do I need to take the bass out? Do I need to mix it louder? Because the more and more I push the bass, the compressor in that group is now going to fight back. Therefore, it's going to push against you. So again, we need to keep that in mind. So let's now keep going. We're towards the end here with the compression. I'm only going to do my vocals and my break synths. I do not compress my effects generally. Okay, these are definitely louder than anything else we've compressed, so we need to watch out for that so far. And again, something similar to what I did with the chords, a longer release or slower release. Therefore, it's just kind of taming stuff. It's not really getting that pumping effect. And guys, too, if you're newer to this plugin and you want to kind of get really nitty and picky with it, you guys can always go to a larger look right here. Very cool to have this, this function here. Okay, I'm not going to do much more on the actual break because these are louder. I'm going to definitely bring these down mix-wise. Yeah, that's feeling right. I'm not going to go further than that on the break synths. Those don't need to be touched. Now, the vocal group, those I can push just finalized, going back and forth against the kick and stuff like that. These can be pushed harder, too. These are going to be sitting back in the mix. I don't want them too loud. So with that being said, a good medium threshold here and bringing back the wet is probably going to do it. And I'll put on the vocal, so it's going to shut off our ratio again. You can tell those are really loud, so let's bring them back. Yeah, so those are being more pushed, more compressed than anything else. Overall, it's very sharp. You guys can see the really high sharpness cuts as opposed to this. More of a smooth effect. I want it to be more jumpy, kind of stuttery in a way, to make them pop out of the mix. That's just a compression choice that I like making on vocals like that. Something with more of a phased vocal, a verse, pre-chorus, chorus, maybe a pop track that has more words to it rather than vocal cuts. I would do lighter compression than that, and I would do a bit of a longer attack. Therefore, I'm not making it jump in and out of the mix. That's just an option that I like doing. Like I said, I'm going to leave the effects wide open. I'm not going to compress those. So that's how I do the compression up front. Again, guys, as you're going, the compression threshold settings, the attack and release could change slightly because you are adjusting the levels now of each one when we get to that. So we're going to have to double check on that. But now let's bounce over to opening up the Q2 and start EQing.